Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and of course today is the speed up voiced over version of the Art Joy of Sharing live stream show from April 26th, 2018. And for the show today, Peg and I made our Mission Inspiration Challenge art journal pages, and this is from Mike Deacon's group Mission Inspiration on Facebook. Monthly challenge for art journaling, and these particular prompts were from Linda Simpson. She also has a YouTube channel. So the first step was to add a thin wash of paint or gesso. Also, there is a 3-color option, and I decided to use those colors exclusively, pretty much. I didn't add anything else but those colors. They're pistachio, yellow, and blush pink. So in order to make these pastel colors, when I don't have those colors in my paint collection, because my paints are artist tone paints, the way that you make a tint or a pastel is to just add titanium white. So I blended my own version of these colors with titanium white and regular paint, and then applied it using a hotel key card, a plastic card, so that I could scrape a very thin layer over there, over the whole page with these colors. You might have noticed that there was a drawing on the page already at the beginning of the show before we went live in the green room. I worked on my drawing because I didn't think I'd be able to complete this entire page in an hour and a half, which is how long our live stream show is. Second step was to add texture through a stencil, and I wanted to use just this bumpy, kind of curly bumpy part of that stencil, so I used some masking tape to mask off the areas that I did not want to use on the stencil. And then I'm using a palette knife and applying light molding paste from Golden, which is a quicker drying version of, texture paste. And I also used this Tim Holtz dots stencil as well, and just put some around the rest of the areas. Step 3 was to glue pattern paper shapes. I decided the pattern paper that I would use would be this hand-stamped tissue. This is just cheap tissue like you put inside of a present, to make it look nice, or inside of a bag or something like that. It's just inexpensive tissue. And I have stamped on it at some previous time with some flower stamps and leaves, and I stamped those in black archival ink, so I know that that ink is not going to run. At some point we had a stamped image swap in our Art Joy of Sharing Facebook group, and so that's what these are from. I just took sheets of tissue paper and stamped on them, and then I occasionally use them for collage material, and when you use these, they fade, the tissue outline fades into the background, so it's no big deal to collage those on, and I used liquid matte medium for that. The next step 4, was to add a focal image or two. Well, I had already drawn in pencil, in graphite pencil, onto my page, and then scraped a fine layer of paint over it. I could still see the illustration. Just a quick little girl with an umbrella. It just seemed like a very appropriate image. Girls with umbrellas are always cute. Even if they're on the salt shaker bottle, they're still cute. So I just decided that that would be a good focal image this morning when I looked at the prompts, to kind of go with this whole, April theme. Just seemed appropriate. So I'm using the Faber-Castell Pitt pins, my illustration pins, to go over the lines in black. And now I've already introduced the color black by putting on these collage images. And so completely appropriate to add the black lines to my girl. And then I'm using some of that leftover paint that I've been misting to keep it wet with water, because in my climate it dries very quickly, and I have it over on my palette. I use some of that to kind of color in the flowers and also the umbrella. And then I'm going back in with a thicker line to add a little bit more dimension to my illustration. And I'm coloring this with the Artist Pit Pins, brush pins set. Also from Faber-Castell, same company that made my illustration pins. And I don't have very many colors in those, so I'm kind of layering color to make shadows. I did try I started out with my Spectrum Noirs, but those are alcohol markers and they weren't coloring over the acrylic paint. Also, they were smearing the black because they have alcohol in them. They were smearing the pit pin, which usually doesn't happen. But in the case of going over acrylic paint, nothing could absorb in or become permanent really. So I switched to these pit pins instead for my coloring. And I'm sticking to the same color palette, the pistachio, yellow, and blush pink. And then, of course, I have to add a little bit of brown in her hair and things like that, and, flesh tone or whatever. But mostly just those colors through the whole project. So you can see me kind of coloring and then writing off on my paper. It's because the black ink is coming up onto the tip of my brush pen, and so I just write the brush pen on the paper to remove the black ink and then go back in. I can also remove kind of a smeared area in that same way. Then I'm using the pens over the acrylic on the umbrella to do some shading. That umbrella is really cute. It's cuter than the girl. The girl has kind of a wonky face, but it was a quick drawing early in the morning before the show. I decided to add a little bit more acrylic paint, so I'm really mixing acrylic paints and these pens together, but as a mixed media, but you do need to remember that you can't write with that pen over the paint until it's completely dry. You will ruin your pen. The paint is kind of plasticky and it will get on that tip, that felt brushy tip, and it will just dry in there and you'll never be able to use that pen again. So you need to be careful about making sure that everything is dry. So once my little girl is all colored, moving on to the next step, which is to make marks with household items. This is from a takeout container from Chili's, which is a restaurant that I go to pretty often, and I never can eat all my food, so I always bring some home. So I think of that as a household item. It's styrofoam, and I'm just cutting raindrop shapes out of it and then gluing them onto another piece of the styrofoam to make a little mark making tool. I didn't have any type of a raindrop shape anywhere. So that's what I wanted, was to put some raindrops in the sky. Using that same paint that I mixed and applying it to my homemade stamp using a foam brush and just like kind of pat onto the stamp and then stamping it on to make these marks of raindrops in the sky. And of course give that a really good dry. Next step was to add a border of your choice. The stamps that I had used on the tissue paper have kind of like almost a hesitation or double line, like they were kind of scribbly drawn. And so I thought adding a black border in that same style of kind of like two lines that are going around and over each other would be appropriate. So I removed all the masking tape and everything and then applied my border. And the next thing was to add a quote using one or more from the suggested words, and the suggested words were nature, flower, showers, trees, and April. So I thought April showers bring May flowers was an appropriate quote. It's the most common, obvious thing I could possibly think of, but again, early in the morning. So then the final thing was to finish with splats, drips, or raindrops. I decided that I wanted that texture area to have a little bit of something on it because it was just boring. It was just boring white texture. So I got out a couple glimmer mists. These are, I think it was turquoise and moss. And I'm just spraying them over the areas where the texture paste is and then spritzing it with water in some cases and blotting off the excess to just make those textured areas have a little bit more dimension. So I hope you've enjoyed this Mission Inspiration Challenge speed through, and if you want to watch the full length thing, just go over to the Art Joy of Sharing live stream channel. That's it for me. Thanks. Bye-bye.